Great to see everybody. Our opening question for today. Hi, everybody on Zoom as well. Welcome, welcome. Opening question is, does everything happen for a reason?
Yeah.
Yes or no? What are some of the comforts and some of the difficulties if that's your worldview? So we'll give a second to chew on that and to chew on a delicious snack.
Did you decide on this before?
So yes, but in light of everything, I made it more robust. So it's got some of what we didn't get to. Everything we talked about. Yes.
Oh, yeah. I thought maybe fire. I'll believe it when it's that way. And I don't need 30 of my 100. Okay.
Oh. All right, I'm gonna get the text sheet up on Zoom, but in the meanwhile, does anybody have some answer? Thank you, that's good. Yes, go for it.
I have no answer.
Okay,
I was listening to this morning. I'll briefly summarize it.
and I want us to hear Bill, everybody. I want us to be able to hear Bill.
Little YouTube, I forget, it was in India. He was asked, do you believe in God? And he answered, he said, there are two gods. I think he was Israeli, although it was an Indian presentation. He said, there's that mysterious God that we proclaim we know nothing about. We can never know anything about. God's ways are not understood. Maybe he controls or she controls or they control, whatever. And we completely acknowledge that we have no insight whatsoever. And then there's the other God who tells women how long their skirts should be, what type of fork we should use, how we should eat, the minutiae of our life. And so he wanted to characterize it as two separate ideas of God. He said, I don't believe, because I'm happy believing in this mysterious God, because it's mysterious. It couldn't be. The other one he wasn't so happy about, but so this question I think falls into the mysterious God component, and it makes it hard though, because it bleeds into the everyday. And I think when it bleeds into the everyday, that's where we begin to have difficulty. Anyhow, that's my take.
Great. So let me just reflect on a couple things because you brought a lot, but the idea that maybe there are two gods, or put another way,
Different attributes.
right, to keep it monotheistic in language, that there is a transcendent aspect of God and an immanent aspect of God. And that's very Kabbalistic in thinking as well. But the Shekhinah, right, God's immanent presence. When you sit in your sukkah, you're meant to feel God's presence up close. But then there's that other aspect of God, which is transcendent, which is inaccessible to us down here, which is shrouded in mystery, perhaps. So maybe different ways to experience or conceive or encounter the divine. Welcome. Hi, Helena. Grab a plate. Go ahead, Jerry.
No, but at a personal level, I wish it were so, but I don't believe it so. I don't believe that there's a reason for everything. And because if I did, then I have to be angry with God, because God allows very bad things to happen. And so if there is a purpose to it, I don't like the way he does it. If it's random, that's the way life is. So I say, I wish it were so, but I don't believe so.
Great. So I want to linger on this point for just a moment and unpack everything that's here as well, because on one hand, if you believe that everything happens for a reason, that God is responsible for the turning of every leaf, there's great meaning that comes with that. Hi, Sarah, welcome. Grab a plate. Thanks for being here. If we're asking if you believe that everything has a reason, that God has a plan. So the benefit of that kind of thinking, I'll get you around, sorry, one moment, is that imbues life with great meaning. It might enhance your connection with the divine, feeling like there is, a relationship you can have with God who is responsible for everything. And you look at life as being more meaningful that way, right? As opposed to random, right? That's sort of, in some ways, religion versus science, right? That one of the big religious rejections of scientific worldviews is that it seems so cold and unfeeling and indifferent as opposed to the meaning and purpose you might get from a more spiritual or religious worldview. But the danger and the downside of trying to see God as responsible for the turning of every leaf is, how do you account for the problem of evil? Right, so I have a good friend of mine, I may have shared this before, but she grew up in I think an Orthodox community, and she said everybody would tell me when my mom died young of cancer that God has a reason. And going back to what Bill said, that it's mysterious, right? We just can't know. And that often is what you may still get as an answer in more Orthodox circles, right? And maybe even our own, that it's a mystery. We just can't know. It's hubris to think that we can and that's in the book of Job, right? And parts of Isaiah, right? That God's thoughts are not our thoughts, right? We can't understand God's working and plan. We just have to sort of accept it and try to find strength. But the problem there, and she said, this is her response, is if that's God's plan, I want nothing to do with that God. Right? So that is how you square that is a challenge. Ron and then
Mine was actually a question rather than an answer.
Mhm.
And the question is there a difference between belief and faith? Can you have belief and not faith, or faith and not belief?
So how do you define those terms?
Yeah, I don't. And that's why I'm asking, what's the difference between?
Well, I think that faith,
Because, I mean, I believe there's a supernatural thing that put this earth together.
Mhm.
I'm not sure that I have faith that, you know what I mean?
yeah, that's it. So instead of trying to answer that, I think I'll just let that linger because it's an interesting question. I mean, at first I would think that faith sort of connotes more of a religious, where belief, you can believe in the goodness of humanity, you can believe in, but although belief also has religious connotations, faith, I think, kind of has more of a, do you believe in God, faith kind of thing. Gary, and then we'll go around this way and then we'll jump into the text.
Okay, so since you used the word science,
Louder, please.
We can't
since
hear you.
you used the word science, this is my wife's question to all of the rabbis that she's encountered. So the calendar is 5,085 years.
Mhm.
God created heaven and earth. Where did the dinosaurs come from? And scientifically, we know there are millions of years old.
Right, they didn't make it onto the ark.
No,
Yeah.
the question.
Or God planted the bones to test our faith.
So the question is not for you to answer in a specific,
Uh-huh.
but it's what you choose to believe,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, I like that. I gave an answer to this in a sermon about God's time versus human time and what is a day, right? Evening and morning, one day, but if the sun and moon are created on the fourth day, how are we measuring days? Are they eras? Are they epochs? And I don't coin that. That's been an interpretation that exists. But what I liked about it as a new parent was a day for a child or a baby versus a day for a parent. And then all of a sudden your kid is crawling and walking, right? And then all of a sudden they're driving and all of a sudden they're graduating, all of a sudden they're having kids of their own.
They're talking back.
Yeah, they're talking about
That out.
That's right. Evening, morning, one day, right? To a parent, that was a second. But to us, so I sort of think of God's time version. But there are a lot of different ways to go. Wait, I wanted to get there were hands. Let's go around here and then back to.
Partially back to this.
Okay.
And that is, I've heard, I don't remember which rabbi it was.
Ron,
That-
excuse me, can you talk a little louder? We cannot hear you.
We might not want him to talk.
I can
I
grab.
may not want to hear it. Who said that Shana actually means cycle? It doesn't mean years. So we've had 5,700, what's the number?
85.
In 85 cycles. The first cycle to us might have been many, many thousands or millions of years. The first cycle, the second cycle, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. So how you interpret time. Good. Okay, let's go around.
But there is something that Shana doesn't really mean year. It means cycles.
I like that. I like that. Yeah, well, everything is cyclical in Judaism, right? That's sort of how we conceive of time. Go ahead.
Life cycle.
Life cycle events. Nice. Nina, go ahead.
I believe that there is a reason and a purpose because of silver linings.
Mhm.
The older I get, the more that I see God's presence in every kind of situation.
Mhm.
And to me, that's a sign of hope and positivity.
Okay, hold on to that. And even in a session we had before where we talked about the Piasetzner Rebbe who lived through the Shoah, the Holocaust, that even he found God, not in the Nazis, not in the horror, but as a being that was suffering along with us, that God feels our pain along with us. And that was a way for him to salvage relationship and the idea of God, even amidst the most dreadful kind of horror. Or perhaps in the ways that people show up for one another, and we'll get into that. In response to horror, that's where God lives, not in the evil and so that might work for you, that might not work for you, but the fact that he was living through the Shoah and still found a way to find God in it is definitely interesting. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so if everything has a reason, how does that tie into predestiny?
Mhm.
That everything is destined already, and then obviously free will.
Right.
The three of them don't kind of mesh up for me.
Right. So how can you have a God that is all-knowing and free will at the same time, right? And you can say, well, God knows the outcome, right? You have free will to make your choices. God just knows what you're going to do, but you still have free will. The problem with that is, if God knows I'm gonna get chocolate ice cream, then did I ever really have a choice? So it's hard to square those two. At the end, we'll go with Rabbi Lawrence Kushner with his famous book that we brought up a couple times here, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And he Harold, what did I say, Lawrence? Sorry, Harold, thank you.
Be careful.
That he holds on to a God that is all-knowing, but parts with a God that's all-powerful. And we'll read some of him later. Okay, let's keep going here. Final comments, and then did anybody else before Sheila have? Okay, go ahead. I'll just go in order down this stretch. Please.
Thank you. I would like to believe that I can pin all the bad things that happen on God.
Mhm,
As at least I could then feel like there was a reason
mhm.
that this person got sick or this person had some tragic thing happen. And that would give me comfort in that it isn't just random. That, I don't know what the reason was, but God had some hand in that.
Mhm.
And the same with when good things happen. I really think that God is kind of not that personally involved,
Mhm.
is my real feeling. That when people get sick, they get sick. Somebody's gonna get sick. It's, unfortunate that it might be somebody I love or be me. But that doesn't mean that God is sitting up there looking down and going, yeah, her turn.
Right.
I think that he's observing our reactions and responses, but I don't think he pushes a button and says, okay, time for this one to be sick, time for this one to be well, time for this one to get a great job.
Mhm.
I think he's out there looking and seeing our reactions, but I don't think he's personally dealing with each of us in that way.
Beautiful.
But
Thank
it
you
still
for
feels
sharing.
good to
It's a
pray,
female. though.
because, maybe.
Thank you. Sheila, go ahead.
It's a
Well,
female.
I think I pretty much would say what,
You're not
You're
easy.
female, maybe that's. why things
Giselle
happen.
said, but, we can't be, you can't, first of all, what's good for one person,
Mhm.
what one person thinks of as being good is
Uh-huh.
not necessarily what someone else thinks. Especially if someone is sick. And sometimes it's actually good if they die. Because they're living, I think this is the whole idea of palliative
Mhm.
in hospice.
Right.
Because we're just mitigating them, we're making life miserable for them.
Belonging,
For
suffering.
what purpose?
Mhm.
So science can find, or somebody can have another statistic.
Right.
I think your viewpoint is very often based on your own life.
Mhm.
Now Kushner's life, he had a pretty good life.
Mhm.
He grew up, in a very comfortable house. He was very bright and whatnot. And he had this son, and the problem was the son was very bright. He knew he knew all the baseball scores. He was playing the violin at 8. We had to listen to him play. And it was good.
Wish you would speak.
And I think that's what made it harder for him.
You speak into the mic, Sheila. Some people can't hear.
That's what made it harder for him
Speaking.
to accept.
Mhm.
And,
Same as ours.
and when he wrote the book, you could almost think of it as a reward financially.
Right.
It affected him very much,
Mhm. Interesting.
but it's. I don't think we could ever know. Everybody reacts differently to things.
Right.
And each one, it's based on not just what they think, but what their own history, what their past. Jerry, for example, have a different perspective of things. Because he has dealt with people who've had kids who've had, I mean, if you ever want to talk about something like that, I mean, Jerry has dealt with that. But he once said to me, when I once asked him, how can you deal with this all the time? He said, because I've had successes.
Because I've had successes. Yeah, so I'll just say a couple things to sum up what you said, and then we're gonna jump into the text. One being that, how do you define good, right? It's hard to know what's good. It is relative, right? What's good for one person might not be what's good for another. And then the other piece being that, yes, we have to account for the problem of evil, but we also have to account for the problem of good, right? It's one thing to write off God or God having a plan in light of evil, but then we still are on the hook to come up with, how do we account for the good? Where does that come from? So we'll get into that as well. Okay, for the bulk of this teaching, it's most of the texts begin at the beginning up until page 2. Actually, I guess maybe it's 50-50. The first half is about God's plan. The second half is going to introduce challenge to God's plan, and then hopefully we'll find some kind of satisfying resolution. But you'll be the judge of that. So this is called God's Plan and the Rickety Ladder. Who wants to start? Genesis 37:15. This is the beginning of the Joseph story, which we just concluded in our Torah cycle.
Oh, Rabbi, can
Yeah.
I interrupt just for a
Mhm.
second? Speaking of Joseph, he says exactly the fact that when he encounters his brothers finally, he says, I'm not going to be angry with you.
Right.
You know, I won't be violent because it was God's plan. And look, in the end, survived a famine and we reunited.
Exactly. So Nina's point from earlier, saying that she believes everything has a reason and a purpose because there's always a silver lining. And she's citing Joseph as the main example for that, which is where we're headed to a certain extent. That when Joseph reveals himself to his brothers and his brothers are mortified that, you know, the brothers who sold him to slavery at one point were going to kill him out of their jealousy, that he would exact revenge. Now that he's second to Pharaoh, he is very powerful. Joseph immediately forgives them, says, don't worry, I'm not interested in vengeance. You have to understand that what you did to me was all part of God's plan so that I would be able to rise to prominence in Egypt, that I would be able to use my God-given gift to interpret dreams to preserve life, because I was able to predict the oncoming famine and prepare for it and save life, not just in Egypt, but in the whole region. Okay, good. So let's start here. This is when Joseph is still a boy. Jacob tells him to go find his brothers the moment before they throw him in a pit, right? And he can't find them. Go ahead. Who wants to read Genesis 37:15? First source.
A man came upon him wandering in the fields. The man asked him, what are you looking for?
Great. Who wants to read the Rashi and Ibn Ezra, our famous 11th century commentators? Go for it.
What are you looking for?
And a certain man found him, according to the plain meaning of the text, a passerby found him.
Good, but go one above. That's the Ibn Ezra. Now go for the Rashi. And a man found him.
Above it.
Oh, I missed that part, yeah. And a man found him. This was the angel Gabriel, as it is said, and the man, Gabriel.
Good. So Rashi, who is a master of Midrash, he's like well-versed in all the Midrash, is quoting Genesis Rabbah to say that this was no man, this was an angel pointing the way, sort of as an invitation, guiding him. He was lost, and this is no ordinary man. This is an angel who pointed, which suggests what? If it's not just an ordinary man pointing him in the right direction, if it's an angel, how does that change our worldview?
He's already known to God. He's not a stranger. In other words, God has recognized him in the sense that he allows him to be followed by an angel.
Yeah, or that, did anybody ever see Joan of Arcadia? It was a show a while back, maybe from the 90s. It was a show, the premise was there's this girl, this young woman, Joan, and she meets God in all these different ways as just characters, and God appears to her as all these different characters. And do you know the song, What If God Were One of Us, right? Just a stranger on the bus, that was the opening, the theme song. And that was the idea. One day she'd meet a punk rock guy, and that was God talking to her. One day it would be an old librarian who, it was God and all these creatures. But that's sort of what Rashi's saying here, that this mysterious figure who doesn't have a name, unnamed in the Torah, is not a person, actually an angel, right? God is guiding us through different people in our lives, or maybe they're not people at all, they're angels, right? So sort of that would suggest a worldview of everything kind of has a purpose, and we're sort of pushed along to where we're meant to go, right? So this angel guides Joseph to peril, to the pit, right? He finds his brothers and if he didn't find his brothers, maybe that wouldn't have happened. So again, that's sort of Nina's silver lining of, okay, this what's about to happen to Joseph is very bad, and yet God guided him to it through an angel, because maybe there's a mysterious but
Hashgacha
Hashgacha Yonah,
So something above.
understanding of the angel, of the dove.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to explain more what you mean by? One sec, Helena, do you want to step that out a little bit for people who are not familiar with that phrase?
So we used to say Besher, something happened. You don't know why it happened, but the result was a good result, a saving of a life.
Right. And Hashgacha Yonah means the supervision
Of something above us that we don't, literally, we cannot touch, we cannot see, but something is there.
Right. Sheila, go ahead.
You know what's immediately what you're making me think of, that there is a moral in everything. And that basically, and I hope this doesn't, I mean, I haven't thought it out, okay? I'm saying it on the spur of the moment, but this is Aesop's fables. What the Bible is trying to tell us are morals.
Yeah.
In other words, how to behave
Mhm.
using all these figures. And
That still doesn't sound.
So let me say something. So yeah, telling a story that there are morals and lessons to glean from it. You mentioned Aesop's fables. I want to riff on that. So excuse the pun, but going to Esau's fable, when Jacob is about to confront his brother who's ready to kill him, he wrestles with an angel, right? And he's like, I won't let you go until you bless me, which
No, he blesses, he fights with an Ish, and I claim it's the same Ish. It's the family Ish.
okay. So once again, we have a question of, is it a person? Is it an angel? Right? But what I wanted to bring up there is this idea of, we wrestle with things our whole life, right? We have obstacles and challenges. Life is not easy. And yet it's a very Jewish instinct. This is from Rabbi Sharon Brous in her book, The Amen Effect, to wrestle meaning from it. It doesn't mean that it's excusing terror or horror as being part of God's plan, but saying that it's a very Jewish instinct to say, I'm not going to let this obstacle pass until I wrestle meaning, a moral from it that will strengthen me, that will enhance my life.
it's very interesting that I have not seen any of these Orthodox parties and whatnot saying anything about the hostages, that this was God's plan, or we misbehaved. And
It's hard to.
it's just,
Yeah.
it just struck me. The Holocaust, everybody had their ideas.
Mhm.
You know, we were bad.
Yeah.
Nobody is saying nothing has been.
Good, and I hope,
read
I
it.
hope you're right about that, but I do know that religious figures all the time will look at fires or floods and say that this was punishment, God is punishing because of X, Y, or Z. Right? Often it can be, oh, this is because of homosexuality, right? We're being punished for, right? So you see this all the time and that's one of the negative effects of believing that everything happens for a reason. You could co-opt it for hate and intolerance and vitriol. Go ahead, Bill.
It's in a more positive way for those of us who want to see our own ability to control things. When he asked, well, what are you looking for? This is a 17-year-old boy who had a youngest brother, probably never had a way of thinking on his own. His father said, go find them out in the fields. And here's someone who's asking him, what are you looking for? With the emphasis on the you, and maybe it's the first time he's had an opportunity for a little introspective. Yeah, what am I going to make of these powers? What am I going, now, of course, he ends up in the pit, but it might have started him down this, yeah, but it might have started him down this road of thinking for himself.
Right.
And so instead of being guided by God or this angel, do A, B, and C, the guidance is, think for yourself, make some choices for yourself.
Good, maybe it's a coming of age moment, maturity.
Possibly so.
Let's keep going because we do have a lot of text to go through. So, okay, now I want to go to Genesis 41. Who wants to read that? That's the third text on the first page. Go for it, Larry.
Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt gave offense to the Lord, the king of Egypt.
Okay, right. So we know that once Joseph is sold to Egypt, he then, because of an accusation that he was trying to sleep with Potiphar's wife, Potiphar throws him into prison, into the pit once again. Now he's in jail. There he meets a baker and a butler. We probably are very familiar with this story.
The pit and the cave, interesting.
Yeah. No, it's a lot of going to the Kabbalistically Yeri Delet Sorach Aliyah, that we have to go down before we can go up, because this is all about, and like right now, Exodus, where it's going to get really bad, right? Slavery, but all of this is sort of in service of Sinai. Eventually we will rise to the highest heights and receive Torah. So it's another way of looking at God's plan, that even in the worst parts of it, maybe it's Yeri Delet Sorach Aliyah. Maybe this is the going down so that we can come. It's the Jewish corollary to Newton's law of gravity, right? What goes up must come down. In Judaism, we believe what goes down must come up, which is hopeful. Okay, so let's read the commentary, Kerem Hatzvi, on Genesis 41, on the verse we just read. Who wants to read? About the fly. Go ahead, Cindy, thanks.
Sometimes one of the smallest things imaginable can bring about great events. It was because of this fly that Joseph came to Pharaoh's attention and eventually became governor. As a result, our forefathers went down to Egypt. And who knows what our history would have been without that little fly.
Right, I love that. And it's kind of the butterfly effect, right? That the flapping of a butterfly's wings somewhere in remote part of the world actually impacts what happens on the other side of the world in the future, right? That it's this way of looking at everything as being interconnected and deeply meaningful, right? That this is like the ultimate extreme of God has a plan and everybody has a purpose and a role in life, even if we don't realize it at the time, right? If that fly didn't fly into the wine that made Pharaoh so upset that he jailed his cupbearer, then the whole history would not have been set into motion that allowed Joseph to interpret the cupbearer's dream. And then the cupbearer, when he's restored to his position, remembers Joseph to Pharaoh, says when Pharaoh is troubled by his dreams that he can interpret, the cupbearer says, I'm just remembering when I was in jail, when you jailed me because you didn't like the wine, which the Midrash is saying because there was a fly flew into it. I met this man who can interpret dreams. Let me get him for you. And that sets everything in motion for Joseph to rise to power, to save everyone, to bring us down to Egypt, right? Because Joseph then brings his family during the famine and says, I got you, right? I'm in a position to help you. Come down, move down to Egypt. They flourish until they don't, which is this week's parsha. A new Pharaoh arose who knew not Joseph and then enslaves us because we're threatening. We're doing too well. We're multiplying, right? All of this because of a tiny little fly. Our entire history as a people, because that fly landed in Pharaoh's wine. It's a different way of looking at the world. Sure.
You know that the story is prefaced with the fact that there's a reason, everything. But what it highlights for me is by far the exception and not the rule. So I don't know that it influences me in changing my mind about whether or not everything in life has a design.
Yeah, so maybe it's not a compelling, but I think it's an interesting thing to contend with. If you look at life that way, what are the benefits to us spiritually of looking at life that way? What are the potential dangers of looking at life that way? That's what we're going to explore here today. But I think looking at the world that way might lead you to thinking of a God who is just so beyond us in our thinking, right? That if anybody read the book Shogun or saw the show Shogun, at the very end, I don't want to spoil it, but you realize that it's this elaborate game of chess that only the greatest minds are able to figure out that if I move this here and think 50 steps ahead. Same with the movie Conclave, about the election of the Pope, right? There's this metaphor of chess and truly great minds to say, okay, this is going to happen, this is going to cause this to happen, which then that'll happen, and this will happen. And it's always amazing when you find a mind like that. God is that on steroids, right? I'm gonna plant a fly to go here. That's gonna make him go to jail. Well, he'll meet Joseph. Joseph will interpret the dreams. Israelites will come down to Egypt. Then they'll be freed. You know, all these things that are a million steps ahead. Does it add any meaning to your life to conceive of a God who is sort of this master chess player, or does that present problems of, are we just pawns on God's chess table? Like what does that mean for the individual life or for the tragedy and the evil that we experience?
Right after the book.
The Shogun show was after the book. Book came first.
Just questioning, we're reading it after the fact, but happening to the people. Was it planned that way? And then we read the story, or is it the reverse?
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. Interesting to think, right, what comes first?
Or does God say, let's put a fly in here and see what happens?
Okay, well,
See what people do.
that goes back to Job.
To even see
Right, when Job opens, yes,
your experience.
yes, okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt you, but in the book of Job, it starts with Hasatan, this adversary angel, and God says, have you considered my servant Job? And the angel says, oh, he's only so good because he hasn't had hardship. Start taking things away from him, we'll see how good he is. That is sort of this like God as mad scientist experimenter, like what's going to happen? Let me just see what happens, right? How will they react? Okay, let's keep going. So Genesis 40:23, continuing with our Joseph story about the cupbearer after he's restored to his position. Anybody want to read?
Yet the chief cupbearer did not think of Joseph. He forgot him.
Right, he's restored to his position. Joseph had asked him to remember him to Pharaoh. He doesn't do it. He forgets because his own situation has improved. He forgot about Joseph who helped him. Let's go to the commentary on this verse, Bina le'itim. I tried looking him up. I couldn't find a Wikipedia page.
Yeah, I disagree with him.
Mhm.
I mean, I know we haven't read
Wait,
it.
we haven't read it. Let's read them first and then we hear. Go ahead. Would you like to read for us? The final one on, that'd be great.
This seems to be redundant. The answer is that he forgot him does not refer to the butler, but to Joseph, who, not placing his trust in man, forgot the butler.
Okay, so what this means, and then we'll get to Ron's point, is nothing in Torah can be redundant. So if it says, yet the chief cupbearer did not think of Joseph, he forgot him, it wouldn't say that twice. So that he forgot him isn't just repeating that the cupbearer forgot about Joseph, it's coming to tell us something different, which is that Joseph forgot the chief cupbearer. What's meant by that is that it's coming to tell us that Joseph never actually put his hopes in the cupbearer, because that would be heresy for a faithful man like Joseph to believe that he is depending on another human being to improve his situation. Joseph, the faithful Joseph, according to this commentator, knew that he was always in God's hands. So it was Joseph who forgot the butler because he was never actually sitting in his cell waiting for the butler to tell Pharaoh about him so that he would be redeemed. Joseph wouldn't be so simple-minded as to think that his redemption is tied up in another human being. He knows that he places his faith in God, not human beings. That's what the commentary is coming to say. Okay,
So now I have to disagree with you also, because it's the
You're disagreeable.
it's the redundant that I agree with. You said nothing in Torah is redundant. I say, no, there's all kinds of stories that are the same stories over again.
okay.
And what I was thinking about here with this one was so much of the Torah has couplets where it says the same thing two different ways. So I say, no, this is saying the same thing in two different ways.
Okay, so Ron disagrees that every time it's redundant, it must not be redundant and coming to teach something new because we see potential redundancy sometimes. Ruth, go ahead.
I don't see redundancy. I see stressing. It's saying double times, he forgot him. Make sure that you know that he forgot him.
Good. So sometimes repetition is just emphasis. This is what the comments.
Yes.
Tzedek, tzedek tirdov. Justice, justice shall you pursue. Why does it say justice twice? Some commentators say it's emphasis, right? Especially when Torah is kriyah, Torah is chanted. Torah is meant to be almost theatrically performed, right? So emphasis is a tool to get you to underline, right? We don't have punctuation. We don't have, so this is like a bold print or underline is a totally legitimate way to look at it. And some commentators do, but others would say, no, no, no. Torah is very economical. If ever there is another, what is repetition, it must be always coming to tell us something new, which is why we have separate plates and dishes for meat and milk, and it drives us all crazy, right? Because God says, don't cook a kid in its mother's milk, but God says that 3 times. So the first time must have been literally not a kid of the milk. Second time must be, no, you can't benefit from milk and meat at all. Third must be separate dishwashers, right? And it drives us crazy because the joke is God says, I told you 3 times so that you would understand it once. And you didn't understand me at all, right? So, so Jewish, so Jewish. Okay, let's keep going. Now, this is going to conclude our section on God has a plan for everything. And this, I think, is the most beautiful articulation of it. And I want to credit my friend and colleague, Rabbi Jonah Weiner, for teaching it to me. He loves the Mea Shiloach, who is a Hasidic rabbi that actually Rabbi Hal traces his ancestry to. I think that he's from Ishbitza in Poland. So he's called the Ishbitzer. And I think Rabbi Hal has family that goes back there and maybe could be related to this rabbi, which is very cool. Okay, who wants to read the Ishbitzer?
Can I just interrupt again?
Yeah.
I keep like thinking of things after the fact. There wouldn't be really fun, interesting Jewish biography without the butterfly.
Go ahead, say more.
You know the old saying, if you meet somebody who's Jewish and you meet them for the first time and you haven't found any commonality, you haven't talked long enough. And there probably has never been a Jew that I've met that at some point we didn't find something in that butterfly effect. So I just sort of enhancing on that.
I like that. The 3 degrees of separation that we're all connected somehow, if you dig deep enough. Everything is connected.
It's a mix of people. The connections that do exist.
Yeah.
So that butterfly section is me.
It's a beautiful way to look at the world, right? And for some of us, it is so beautiful and so meaningful that it is worth hanging on to, even if it brings theological challenges that we have to wrestle with, right? And that's where mystery is helpful. We say, look, it's all for a reason. We may not understand the reason, but it's all for a purpose, and right, to everything there is a purpose under heaven, right? And that's a very beautiful way to look at the world. But now I want to challenge it a little bit. And right, if everything is just random, right, and that's sort of where religion comes to give us meaning in a world that would otherwise, is it all just meaningless and random? Although you could go further and say, well, yes, let's be academically honest. You could say that to believe that God has a plan, like my friend Naomi, who lost her mom so young, it is just too painful to believe that God has a plan when that plan includes evil. I actually find more meaning in accepting that everything is random, but that is a gateway to meaning. Once you embrace that life is random, that actually opens up once you embrace it, there is a freedom. A sort of freedom and sort of ironically a meaning that comes out of that. So there are many different pathways to meaning. But so this is sort of all the undercurrent of the discussion I want to continue to have here. But let's conclude our everything, God has a plan for everything piece with a beautiful text. Who wants to read the Mea Shiloach? Shu, thanks.
In this parsha, this is Vayigash, right?
Mm-hmm.
He strengthens himself greatly before God by saying, even though I have done improperly, still it is in the ability of God to save me. This is, and Yehuda drew close to him meaning to the innermost depths of Yosef's heart, to such an extent that he would be forced to reveal himself to them.
Okay, brief pause. The context here is that Judah is now coming before Pharaoh. He doesn't realize it's Joseph, his brother, to say, spare Benjamin, the youngest brother that Joseph is holding. Spare him, take me.
Take me.
And that completes the redemptive arc of the brothers who sold their brother away, and now they are demonstrating to Joseph that they've changed, that they're willing to sacrifice themselves for their brother. And that drew close to Joseph's heart. There was, Vayigash means, and he drew close. The Mea Shiloach is saying, it's not just a literal Judah stepped forward to draw close to Pharaoh / Joseph. It was that something penetrated Joseph's heart, that there was a drawing close to the heart that happened here. Okay, keep going. For all these verses.
Verses at the beginning of the parsha are a claim against God, with Yehuda supposing all the while that he was standing before and arguing with a Gentile king. Then when God sent them the salvation, then they saw that even in retrospect, they were never in danger, for truly they were arguing with their brother. Thus it will be in the future when God will save us and redeem us. Then God will show us that we were never in exile and that a foreign nation never ruled over us, only God alone. That's a little bit hard to accept that.
It's absolutely difficult to accept. And that's why we're going to now transition to sort of look, challenging this idea that God has a plan for everything, and it's all part of God's plan. However, I also want us to see the beauty in that they thought all this time they were standing before a flesh and blood king, a Gentile king, when in reality it was their brother the whole time, and they were never actually in any real danger. Of course, that's what bothers us so much, because we're in real danger all the time if you look at Jewish history. But if you understand it as we were never actually subject to foreign, the Romans, the Christians, the Muslims, all the empires under which we lived and were oppressed, that if you peel back the layers, the story of Joseph is all about outer garments and sort of peeling back those outer garments, that if you take away the disguise, it was God the whole time. And that we, as a collective, right, obviously not as individuals who are killed and who are tortured and all the terrible things that happen to our people, but at least as a collective, and maybe you can make the case that individuals as well, that there was never any real danger. I don't mean that literally, because literally there was a ton of danger and there remains a lot of danger today, but that we were always in the hands of God, that it was never actually just random foreign Gentile kings who ruled over us. Underneath it all, it was Joseph. It was actually God. We were in the hands of somebody who had a plan, who is beneficent, who's looking after us. It's sort of what needs to happen in order for redemption to come. Really difficult, and I'm acknowledging that it is super, super hard to swallow, but I also want us to see that for some, that might bring comfort and meaning to know that in the end, what if God is protecting us, and that down the line, we've never been in the hands of just random kings. We've been in God's hands the whole time. The Christian story that's told a lot is the footsteps on the sand, right? A guy's walking along the beach, and whenever he'd walk along the beach, he'd see two sets of footprints in the sand, and he knew those were God's footprints walking with him. But then things went the other way. He lost his job. His wife got sick. All these terrible things started happening. And when he'd walk on the sand, he'd only see his set of footprints. The other set was gone. And when he died, he's standing before God and he says, "You abandoned me. Why, when things got tough? I thought you were with me. Everything was good. And then when things got tough, where were you?" And God smiles and answers, "Those were the times I carried you." Right? They weren't your footsteps. They were mine. Same idea here. Go ahead.
Well, hopefully these aren't too tangential, but 2 points. One, hey, maybe the brothers just liked Benjamin and they didn't like. We're no dream. We don't know a lot about Benjamin.
Yeah.
So that's something else. This whole business that we're learning through the brothers, something wonderful. I mean, Genesis has brothers killing brothers. It has brothers that have war with. Brothers have never been a happy thing. So why are we supposed to now believe that, oh, God's using the brothers to teach us stories where, I mean, we're taught story. I think it's all about God teaching us stories. It's not about the brothers. We learn one thing with Cain and Abel, we learn another with Esau, you know, and so, I don't know, so if we want to see God's hand, I don't think we should be looking at the brothers' thoughts and actions all that much. Anyhow.
Totally fair. I do like seeing Genesis as progress, right? Slow progress, but you start with fratricide, Cain killing Abel, and you end with Judah, who we are Judahites, right? We are Jews. That's where it comes from. And why does he merit? Why does he merit that great title that we come from Judah? Because it's finally getting to this place where if you believe it's authentic, not just him liking Benjamin more than he liked Joseph, but this, okay, now we as brothers are learning how to actually stand up for each other and to Achdut, right? We arrive at Achdut, and that is where Genesis ends, with Ephraim and Manasseh, right? Why do we bless our children that you may be like Ephraim and Manasseh? Because when Jacob switched his hands to bless the younger over which he keeps doing, right? Sowing this, what would be the seeds of dissent and jealousy, it says that Ephraim and Manasseh, they never, Manasseh, who was older, never complained, was never jealous of his brother. So we say, may God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh, which is the end of sibling rivalry, right? At least to a very extreme degree. So point being that you could look at Genesis as we slowly but surely get to a place where we finally are a cohesive.
I shouldn't forget the actions of the brothers. I mean, they needed to eat. But the actions of the brothers going to Egypt left us for 400 years in slavery. So it's not like, oh, we all lived happily ever after,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And, you know, maybe that's beginning of Shemot and not the end of this, but we know that's the story. So it's still not exactly clear to me that brothers' actions are the way we should be driving.
Totally fair. Totally fair.
Totally fair.
Okay, I want us to keep going. Now we're gonna challenge this God has a plan. We only have 10 minutes to do it. No, I'm not.
I'll leave mine too for this. It
Well,
has nothing to do with what you're saying.
maybe, hopefully we'll come back to it, but it's only 3 more sources, so.
Only?
They're long,
They're
but
long.
hopefully we can come back to it at the end. Okay, so this is from the Talmud, from Kiddushin. Who wants to read? Go for it. Sherry, thanks.
A father said to his son, climb to the top of the building and fetch me chicks. And he climbed to the top of the building and shooed the mother bird and took the young. But upon his return, he fell and died. Where is the goodness of the days of this one? And where is the length of the days of this one? The respective rewards for both mitzvot.
What are both of the mitzvot we're talking about? The son fulfills 2 mitzvot. What are they?
Not to shoo the mother bird away.
Not to shoo the mother away. Bob, you have your hand? Or are you just scratching? Oh, just scratching. Okay, not to shoo the mother bird away. Sorry, to shoo the mother bird away, but it's called Shiluach HaKan, where God tells us that you have to. That's okay, it's okay. You have to, if you want the eggs, you can take the eggs, but you have to shoo the mother bird away. It's kindness to the animal that she not look on as her eggs are being taken. And then the other one is simpler. Honor your father and your mother, right? He's doing what his dad said. So he does 2 mitzvot for the price of 1, and what is his reward? He falls and dies, right? This is the poking at the idea that God has a plan, that if you do good, you're rewarded, that good, right? That's why Rabbi Kushner is going to write a book called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. Our Torah tells us in so many ways that if we're good, we'll be rewarded, and the evil will be punished. But that's not what we see of life. So what do we do with that?
Well, no, he did so many mitzvot that he no longer needed to be in this world.
Okay, so we're not anticipating how the rabbis are going to make sense of it. Let's see how they do. Sherry, rather?
No, I haven't.
May be well with you and that your days may be long, refer to the to come.
Okay, good. So that it may be well with you, that is about honoring your father and mother. That's the reward, it says in the Torah. And then that your days may be long is the reward for shooing away the mother bird. And he's saying, no, those things do come true, but God is referring to the world to come, because in the world to come, all is well, and the days are long because it's eternity. That's how one rabbi is making sense of it. Keep going.
Yes, but perhaps this incident never occurred.
Okay, so he's saying, no, impossible, right? The reason it seems contradictory is because this never actually happens. Denial that the world is unjust. Okay, keep going, or random.
Saw an incident of this kind.
Okay, so it's dismissing that denialism. No, I saw another example of this with my own eyes. Keep going.
Perhaps that.
So here's one of the biggest dangers of believing that God has a plan is that then religion can kick you while you're down, right? And so this is the book of Job, right? The friends say, this is happening because you must have done something to deserve it, right? If bad things happen to good people, it must be that you're not as good as we perceive you to be. Maybe you actually have sinned and God is punishing you for that sin. So keep going.
The Gemara says that there is a principle that one is not punished for thoughts alone.
Okay, so if you're saying, but maybe he was contemplating sin, the Gemara is dismissing that and saying, no, Judaism doesn't punish you for your thoughts, only for your deeds. So that doesn't work. If the son was thinking about bad things while he was doing this mitzvah, you can't be punished for that. So that's thrown out. Keep going.
The Gemara asks, but perhaps he was contemplating idol worship.
Oh, so maybe the contemplation was really bad. Keep going.
Sirs, Rabbi Yaakov was saying all this as well. If it enters your mind that there is reward for performing a mitzvah in this world, why didn't these mitzvot protect him so that he should not come to contemplate idol worship?
Okay, because he was such a good mitzvah doer, he would never have fallen into contemplating idol worship. The mitzvahs would have protected him. Okay, so that's thrown out.
Say those on the path to perform a mitzvah are not susceptible to harm.
Everyone talk when they go.
There, Rabbi Sar is referring to those on their way to perform a mitzvah, which is different.
Okay, so what's saying here is, wait, aren't you supposed to be protected on your way to a mitzvah? God wants mitzvot, so God protects those who are attempting to do a mitzvah. And the rabbi is saying, yeah, but that protection is only up until you do the mitzvah. Once you've completed the mitzvah, it's fair game for bad things to happen. Oh, maybe that's a nice way to look at things. Keep going.
Yes, but then Rabbi say that those on the path to mitzvah are not susceptible to harm, neither when they are on their way to perform the mitzvah, nor when they are returning.
Okay, so really nothing, the rabbis are coming up short here. Nobody's really able to make sense in a religious, in a overtly religious way of thinking of why this could have happened. They're coming up empty. So how does the Gemara conclude?
The answer is, in that case, it was a rickety match. Therefore, the danger was established, and anywhere that the danger is established, one may not rely on them.
Then you're saying that those cause the.
By not inspecting the ladder. So, okay, couple things. So, okay, go ahead. We have some problems. Let's hear the problems. Helena, go ahead.
You're supposed to be doing good, and then you get punished no matter what you do. So I have a friend, and I always argued with her. She said, people are mean and bad, and I always believe that people are good. So then comes October 7 and proves me wrong. I'm in dilemma here. I have a problem.
Just classify them as non-people. Then you can be in the Knesset.
So we're being tongue in cheek. Yeah, but right. No, actually, what do you do when the worst of humanity rears its ugly head? How do you hold on to a belief that people are still good at heart, right? This is a challenge forever, but feels especially pointed and difficult right now.
What my mother told me, that it depends how you look at things. There are good and bad in everyone, and the Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Hatov, which every person is fighting with. And there are good people among bad, and there are good people among, and you cannot generalize. Like all Jews are bad or all Jews are stingy, okay? All Germans are bad.
Right.
So you have to go person by person to see how they are.
Right. So on one hand, I feel like human evil is easier to reconcile theologically or philosophically. You say, look, we have free will. We can choose to be evil. right? It's that easy. It's easy to not blame God in the face of human evil, because that's just people giving into their Yetzer Hara or being evil. But it's much harder than like natural disaster, right? Fires and floods, and when it's not human, how do you make sense of that? Right, so I wanna keep going. Go ahead.
Evil statement. Evil doesn't absolutely have to come from people that are believers, whether they're Jewish or not,
Mhm.
right? I mean, you could be a non-believer and still be evil.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's different kinds of evil, right? There's religiously motivated evil, right? All the religious wars and all that stuff, but evil comes from
I'm kind
everywhere.
of answering what she said.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. All right, so, but then what do you do about natural disaster or disease or, and so forth? The sages taught, now we're in the penultimate text here. The sages taught, certain philosophers asked the Jewish sages who were in Rome, if it is not your God's will that people should engage in idol worship, for what reason does God not eliminate it? Right? If God really doesn't want idol worship, why not just eliminate all idols from the world? The sages said to them, were people worshiping only, and that's, by the way, the philosophers who are trying to make the case for idolatry, right? God must not actually be against our way of worshiping the gods, because otherwise God would destroy them, right? But the sages say, were people worshiping only objects for which the world has no need, God would eliminate it. But they worship the sun and the moon and the stars and the constellations. Should God destroy the world because of the fools? So the sages are firing back, because the things you worship are necessary. And should we ruin it? We can't have a nice thing because you're going to, worship them. So we can't have the sun and the moon. Rather, the world follows its course. Ella olam kamin hago noheg. That's what I want to underscore here. The answer they're getting to is rather, the world follows its course, and the fools who sin will be held to judgment in the future for their transgressions, right? That's still a rabbinic belief that reward and punishment exists in this world. The Baraita presents another matter that illustrates the same concept. Consider the case of one who stole a seah, a measurement of wheat, and went and planted it in the ground. By right, it should not grow, right? If this was a world of justice, then stolen wheat should not prosper, shouldn't grow. But the world goes along and follows its course, right? Ella olam kemin hago noheg. And the fools who sin will be held to judgment in the future, right? They'll get their comeuppance, but the world is going to operate under natural law. We can't do anything about that. The Baraita presents another matter that illustrates the same concept. Consider the case of one who engaged in intercourse with, this is redundant, you're saying, we've already had enough examples, with the wife of another. By right, she should not become pregnant, but the world goes along and follows its course, and the fools who sin will be held to judgment in the future for their transgressions. This I find helpful in the sense that the world operates under natural law, right? This is in response to what do you make of fire and floods and disease, right? If not God having a plan and there's a reason for all of this, what do you make? How do you make sense of the natural disasters, right? We can account for human evil, but what about natural devastation and bad? Our rabbis are saying the world follows its own course, that there's nothing we can do about, if it's a rickety ladder, you're going to fall and you will get hurt or you may die, right? We can't do it. No matter how righteous you are, no matter how wicked you are, the world operates the way it operates. And there's simply nothing we can do about that, right? So there is a degree of randomness in that way, right? We're a random bag of chemicals. We get sick, bodies degenerate, decline, and that's just the way of the world. But that to me, what actually brings a level of comfort when I don't have to think of God as being necessarily responsible for all of the bad things that happen. Instead, it's the cost of operation, right? It's not God, it's just the way the world runs.
It's still yesterday.
Go ahead.
What about climate change? In other words, in the past, it would have been true. But today, we actually do, as human beings, have an influence on things like the weather,
Right.
storms, fire, etc.
Well, that then makes it easier. For me, that makes it easier because then I can put that back in the category of human evil, right? It's easier for me to make sense of natural disasters and devastations when it is man-made, because then I don't have to blame God at all. I can still keep blaming people, right? But
Maybe this has very practical implications on a one-on-one interpersonal level. When someone is suffering, say for the loss of a loved one, and they want empathy and support, it seems to me a perceptive person would know which of the approaches to use.
Right.
To use the random approach
Yeah.
or the divine involvement.
Right.
Is that hashgacha protis? Is that what divine involvement is? Is that used the
That's why
same
we
way?
have rabbis.
Hashgacha protis?
I'm
Have
Hashgacha
the same
Potet,
meaning, I wonder.
Pratit.
Pratit,
Rati.
particular supervision. Yeah, I think so. And I like that ultimately maybe you don't have to choose one or the other. Maybe you can pull from both ways of thinking when it's helpful. David, and then I do want to dismiss anyone who wants to leave. If you'd like to stay, we'll read the final piece by Rabbi Kushner to bring it all together. But go ahead, David.
So I'll just throw out there, and if Nelson were here, maybe he could correct my misunderstanding. But this reminds me a little bit about where I think C.S. Lewis is trying to go with the idea that this imperfect world is just a kind of I don't know whether this is the right way to put it, but like a practice template for the more perfect world that follows. And a question that one might ask is, why does it have to be that way then? Why not just put everybody in the perfect world to begin with, and then we don't need this world with suffering and death at all? And apparently the answer to that is because the soul needs to learn something here before it goes there. I don't know, that's all beyond my pay grade, but this does seem kind of to fall into that category, because there are all kinds of things that go on that we can't really explain. Some would say, well, it's trying to deal with those things that help us grow as a community or a society, and perhaps also as individual souls. It's hard to know really, but perhaps that's where this kind of explanation is going.
Yeah, and I think again that it could be helpful to some and present other challenges if this is sort of rehearsal for, and that's the Pharisees versus the Sadducees. The Pharisees believed in a world to come where the balances are meted out, right? So the good suffer in this world because their reward is in the world to come. But the Sadducees, who were more well off in this world, didn't believe in an afterlife because they saw in their experience of the world that the righteous are rewarded in this world. So there's no need for a world to come, right? So it's sort of how you, again, it goes back to it's relative and how you experience the world. Okay, I want to give Rabbi Harold Kushner the final word and get you out of here before too much after 1 o'clock. This is from When Bad Things Happen to Good People. God wants the righteous to live peaceful, happy lives. By the way, sorry, let me just give you some context. Although Sheila mentioned it, Rabbi Harold Kushner wrote this book after his son died of a devastating disease that was kind of like a Benjamin Button disorder, if you've seen the movie, where he just aged rapidly and died. Crazy, fluke, horror. And he writes this book in response to that, trying to make sense of a God who could let bad things happen. And notice, it's not why bad things happen to good people. The book is when. He's not trying to address why it happens, because it happens. It just does. It happens. He's trying to give us some comfort and a way of making sense of when it inevitably happens. God wants the righteous to live peaceful, happy lives, but sometimes even he can't bring that about. It is too difficult even for God to keep cruelty and chaos from claiming their innocent victims. Notice he parts with a God who is all powerful. He may retain a God who is all knowing and all good, but he parts with a God who's all powerful. How does God make a difference in our lives if he neither kills nor cures? So then, okay, well, if God is not all powerful, how is God even potent at all? It could be your question or your counter to that. If God's not all powerful, what good is God, is the question. His answer is God inspires people to help other people who have been hurt by life, and by helping them, they protect them from the danger of feeling alone, abandoned, or judged. God makes some people want to become doctors and nurses, to spend days and nights of self-sacrificing concern with an intensity for which not many can compensate in the effort to sustain life and alleviate pain. God moves people, just like that angel who was moving Joseph in the direction he needed to go. It's more of conceiving of God as being that invitation or that point in the right direction. God moves people to want to be medical researchers or focus their intelligence and energy on the causes and possible cures for some of life's tragedies. To the person who asks, what good is God? Who needs religion if these things happen to good people and bad people alike? I would say that God may not prevent calamity, but he gives us the strength and the perseverance to overcome it. Where else do we get these qualities which we did not have before? The flood that devastates a town is not an act of God, even if the insurance companies find it useful to call it that. But the efforts people make to save lives, I'm thinking about LA, right? The effort people make to save lives, risking their own lives for a person who might be a total stranger to them, and the determination to rebuild their community after the floodwaters have receded, do qualify as acts of God. When a person is dying of cancer, I do not hold God responsible for the cancer or for the pain he feels. They have other causes. But that's minhago shel olam, right? The world operates under natural law. These things just happen. But I have seen God give such people the strength to take each day as it comes, to be grateful for a day full of sunshine or one in which they are relatively pain-free. When people who were never particularly strong become strong in the face of adversity, when people who tended to think only of themselves become unselfish and heroic in an emergency, I have to ask myself where they got these qualities, right? In addition to having to come up with an answer for the problem of evil, we have to also, if we're being fair, come up with an answer for the presence of good. And that's what he's doing here, which they would freely admit they did not have before. My answer is that this is one of the ways in which God helps us when we suffer beyond the limits of our own strength. I think he would say two things. First of all, this isn't the whole book, right? You got to read it. But I think he would say God is not all powerful, and that's why there's not this direct reward punishment ratio that we would like in a just world. God is not powerful enough to necessarily interfere with free will or the way the minhago shel olam. Sometimes there's a rickety ladder, right? We live in a world of danger, and we can't rely on miracles to prevent that danger, but we can look to God for strength and support to overcome the adversity. And that's where God and goodness is all around us, even in the face of adversity. So I want to thank everybody. I'll to those who want to share a few more comments at the end, I will say I just have to leave in 5 minutes for a meeting, but we'll give some time for that. I just want to conclude by saying that I find great meaning, and I love, Nina, the way that you articulated it, in particular, the beauty of believing that God has a plan. And personally, I'm not choosing one over the other. I still maintain, I love the idea that God has a plan, and I find so much meaning in the Joseph story, where a little fly, it's all part of God's plan and has meaning. But I also then have to reckon with the negative, the theological challenges that kind of worldview presents. And the way I do that is I find Rabbi Kushner helpful, and I find the rickety ladder midrash from Talmud helpful. That's to say that we live in a world that operates the way it operates, minhago shel olam, right? There is natural disaster, there is disease, bodies break down. It's just the way that the world operates. And I don't find God to blame for those things. I find God in the response to those things and in the courage and the strength to endure those things.
Yeah, so we have two people standing on the street in
Shikoach.
Los Angeles.
Yesher koach, brought to you.
Goes to the left,
Yeah,
tears that house
Right.
down, and the person standing on the right thinks it's a miracle.
right. Right, and that's Tfilat Shav, which I talked about in a sermon before, about empty prayer, right? You can't say, God, let it not be my house.
Yeah, right.
Because the implication is there is a my house and a your house, right? We should look at the world as we're all neighbors, and your house is just as important as my house, and so I can't pray for not my house.